When I was originally thinking about how to write the music for the game, I suddenly realised that you don't see anybody in the game, and the most important character as such is the island itself. So one of the things that I did with the music was to write the island as if she or he were a character in its own right. And that's really important, I think, that you're going through this space and actually it's completely devoid of people, but the music in a way populates the island, and that the voice of the island speaks to you through the music.
Which is interesting, because I think that's really come on in terms of later games we've done, that sowed the seeds for the way in which we approach music in Rapture, where it was very specifically the voice of characters. A Machine for Pigs as well, where the music was about being Lily's voice in the game, Lily's representation in the game. So it's interesting how, looking back on Esther, a lot of those kind of ideas were tried out here that then came on to take other forms in stuff we've done since. All right, let's talk about walking. Let's do it. We're gonna address the elephant in the room, the very, very slow-moving elephant in the room. So this might be a longer conversation because it kind of fits with that. So Esther was the first of the what are now called walking simulators, and it was really interesting that for us it didn't feel that weird to have a game that was slower than normal, where actually there was lots of time to just walk around and think and look at things. And it was amazing at the time how this was seen as completely revolutionary, and it's really interesting, and it's amazing to see how many other games have kind of like taken it on board. For me, it came from, I didn't see it as being odd to have a game where very little happened, where you thought about what you were doing. For me, it was kind of interesting that you could play some of the best moments in Doom are the bits when nothing's happening and you're just doing it, or System Shock, or those games that I absolutely love. Those quiet moments were the really powerful ones. But Esther is definitely slower than a lot of games, and I think that's actually why it's lasted. I think if we did have moments where we went, should it be faster, should we put a sprint button in, but I'm so pleased that we kind of held our nerve and went, no, just as like in real life, I don't run everywhere because that would be weird. It's okay to have a game where you don't run everywhere, and actually it is a bit weird to run everywhere, but if you're going to do that, then you've got to support it in other ways, and I think the music was a really powerful way of supporting that change of pace.
What's really funny for me though, Dan, is that shamefully I'd never played a game before I worked on Dear Esther, so I didn't realise that all games weren't like this, which is now looking back really naive. But I didn't realise that games didn't have, always have, this slow pace, and I thought there were lots of meditative games out there, and that actually wasn't really the case at the time, and that's exploded since. But in terms of the music, supporting that pace that you'd set emotionally felt really important. So if you listen to the music, actually the BPM is at a very slow walking speed. And it just almost, there's a lot of things now that say it's called entrainment, that it slows your heartbeat, or it can speed up your heartbeat when you listen to music. And actually, I think what the Esther music does really successfully is it makes you almost accept, and more than accept, that speed, you actually start to feel that's the pace of your journey. And that I really like that about the music, actually.
And it makes you just comfortable with that pace too. I think it just eases you into it. You feel relaxed.
One of the really important jobs of a composer, I think, is to provide the player or the listener with different emotional tones and states. And up until this point in the game, the music has been very sparse, very intimate, and very isolating in a way. But the island is also a beautiful and magnificent place, and what I wanted to do at this point for the first time in the game is to create something that was really epic. So we go from that shift in scale where it's very intimate and small to suddenly realising that this is an extraordinary and magical place to be, as well as a difficult and quite sad and melancholic place to be. So the string players were instructed at this point to play with much more vibrato. Up until this point they've played in a very sort of Scottish style actually, no vibrato, very plain playing. But this was a really beautiful cue to write actually, because it has that scale. You suddenly realise that the island is really big, and you have this beautiful vista, and the music then shifts so the player can actually just for a moment, I think, enjoy being where they are.
Yeah, I think that's it. Can I? Yeah, I was going to say, this is actually one of my favourite parts of the game. It's just where everything, all the elements kind of come together perfectly. You've got the music, which is just epic, as Jess has said. You've got the landscape, which is kind of like this big open space. You've got all the little bits and pieces that I put into the detail of the environment, like the movement. There's leaves blowing around, there's the clouds in the sky, there's the mist rising off of the grass, and then you've got Dan's voiceover coming in there, and I think it's just like all of these elements coming together and just in perfect synergy, and just kind of, it really brings chills up your spine.
Inside the bothy, there is a randomised chance that you can find an ultrasound picture on the table, and I think it's the one instance of randomisation in the game that is like the pinnacle of it, because the idea that Esther was pregnant when she died changes everything emotionally about how you understand the story. And not to say that you don't care as much if you don't find it, but it just adds this other layer of just the ground falls away from it the first time I saw it, and the meaning of the crash in Esther's death just means so much more when you go, it's not just about her, there was an unborn child here. And I think that's where the randomisation just hits its absolute peak, because it's one tiny detail that may or may not be there, but if it's there, it's going to fundamentally change the way you feel about the entire thing. And that's the strength that the randomisation elements in Esther kind of provide, that you go, your likely kind of feeling about the story and your understanding about the story can be changed so absolutely by the occurrence or not of one tiny little prop detail. And that's something which, those moments I think are what make it really, really special. So it's for me, it's almost like the most important prop in the game, because when it happens, it's so profound.
Yeah, and it's again, it's just something that makes each playthrough more personal, I think. This is what I love reading about, people finding these things and going, holy shit, I've just found this one thing that's going to change it. That's changed my interpretation completely.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you leave the bothy and the seagull takes off, that's the one jump scare in the game, which is kind of interesting because when we made it, we kind of had to, we kind of called it a ghost story, but there was no intention really. We kind of wanted this dreamy, hallucinatory type thing. But when it came out, people started coming back and saying, this game is absolutely terrifying. I was really, really frightened. And that was really amazing. And I think it's because nothing happened. So we're so trained in games to go, there's stimulus all the time, that if nothing happens, you're waiting for something to happen. And kind of, I tend to go back to again and again the whole sequence in Dead Space 2 when you go back to the Ishimura, and it's like the best bit of Dead Space 2 because for what feels like hours, but it's probably only about 15 minutes, nothing happens and no necromorph comes at you, and it's absolutely terrifying because it's just this space and you're just left in it. So I think the bird here is really interesting because it can actually really, really make you jump. But I don't know if that was part of why people were saying that the game was really scary, but it was a real surprise when people started coming back and saying, this is a frightening game. And I don't know how much of that is to do with the ideas in the game are frightening when you think about them, and how much of it is to do with just the emptiness and the lack of kind of things in the game make it a really quite stressful or quite frightening place. But it was a real surprise, I think, that sort of reaction from a lot of players when we shipped it.
So one of the things that influenced the visuals quite a lot was the tech limitations at the time, and also the kind of themes of the game. Like tech-wise, we were never ever gonna kind of achieve photorealism, and I think that was a good thing. I mean, really, it made us sort of stretch out into other areas, and for me as an artist, it kind of made me think a little bit more creatively. I did a few tests at the beginning, and when I realized this wasn't possible, I kind of went back and I kind of did some research on different styles, and one of the ones that really struck me was this kind of impressionistic painterly style, where it's kind of like there's just enough shape and color there for you to form an image, but a lot of it is just your imagination. It's kind of like the believability of the environment is in your mind. So this is something that I really wanted to bring over into the game, and you'll see a lot of landscapes that kind of look very surreal, very kind of unreal, and that's mainly due to this impressionistic style. one of the more interesting and challenging things to do in the visual side of things is to kind of create an emotional connection with the player. With the music, it's very strong, and the dialogue can kind of help you to feel what the character's feeling, but to kind of really create an atmosphere and to create emotion, it's very difficult. So I designed a few things very subtly within the environment to kind of plant imagery into your mind and kind of make you feel certain things. With this shipwreck on the beach, you can kind of, like, if you look at it from certain angles, you get this real, like it's like a cross sticking up. It's this kind of semi-religious imagery, but it really kind of, it's not obvious, it's not in your face, it's just kind of like something that makes you feel like something you know. And so like there's a lot of deliberate attempts in the game to recreate that feeling, and it's kind of hard to point out in many other places, but it's done in a way where every single rock, every single plant, every single cliff face has been deliberately placed and designed in a way to try and make you feel something in the game.
This is another of my favourite bits in the game, where you come along the edge of the sort of gully and you find hundreds of books, and it's one of the first times where most explicitly there's the suggestion that nothing you're seeing is real, because there's just no way that this can exist, and it's a really amazing, uncanny moment. But it works, I think, for me, because you just go, I don't understand it, but it's lodged somewhere in my head and I can't get rid of it and I can't unsee this. And I think for me, like in terms of my influences from books, I mean, there's the obvious sort of stuff like with Burroughs, Cut Up and things like that going on. But it comes to the kind of books that I really love, that like Roadside Picnic, or the other one by the Strugatskys as well, I absolutely love, is The Ugly Swans, that's just full of these images that you go, I don't understand, I literally have no idea what's going on here, but I can't shake it, it's just got its hooks in me. And I think more recently you've got books like Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation does this so well, where nothing is understandable, but you feel the logic, but you can't understand the logic, but you feel like the logic's there. And that, I think, is a really powerful thing that games are so good at doing, of creating these things. And I think where a lot of game writing for me becomes kind of the wheels fall off it, is that they have these amazing ideas and then suddenly there's this huge rush of going, right, we've developed this mythos and we've shown you all the tips of the iceberg, which are really interesting, but now we're just going to show you the whole iceberg. And actually that's never that satisfactory as a player, because it robs the mystery. And I think the best game writing is those kind of moments where you go, I feel like there's something just outside the edge of my vision or just on the edge of my hearing, but it's the confidence to go, that's it, that's all you get, and the rest of it is up to your imagination. And I think it does loop back to games like Stalker. I think Skyrim at its best does it so well, where you just have these moments where you think, I want to know, but it's going to be down to my imagination to draw those things. And the player's imagination is the most powerful thing you've got in your design kit. There is nothing you can put on screen, there is nothing you can do with audio, there's nothing you can do with dialogue that will ever be as powerful as the player's own imagination. So if you oversell the idea and oversell the image, what you're actually doing is you're kind of not only robbing the player of the opportunity to invest in the game, but you're also fundamentally opting for a weaker tool than what the player can bring to the experience themselves.